Welcome to the Inner Essence, a space of mindfulness, spiritual awakening, and reconnecting with your true self. Breath, be present, and begin your journey with it.
Have you noticed that the more you worry about a problem, the more it seems to grow? As if reality were listening to you? You replay a scene in your mind, and somehow it repeats itself out there. The same tension, the same faces, the same coincidences. What if that's not accident but reflection? What if what you call the world is just your own observation bouncing back? Today, we'll explore why your external reality is not something happening to you, but something echoing from within, and how shifting the way you observe completely changes what the world shows in return. We grow up believing the world is something solid, stable, external, independent of our presence. The table feels hard. The street stays there, whether you look or not. The sky keeps its distance. It all seems obvious, until you start noticing the cracks in the picture. Think of how two people can experience the same moment and walk away with completely different stories. One leaves a meeting inspired, the other insulted. One sees a stranger's silence as peace, the other as arrogance. If reality were truly fixed, both would feel the same, but they don't. Something else is shaping what they see, and it isn't the event itself. Neuroscience has been quietly dismantling the illusion of solidity for decades. What you call seeing isn't raw vision, it's prediction. The brain receives fragmented light and shadow, then fills in the blanks based on expectation and memory. You never perceive reality as it is, only as your mind expects it to be. That's why you can stare at the same sentence twice and notice a typo only the second time. The data didn't change. You did. Now imagine that on a larger scale. Every conversation, every coincidence, every failure or success you interpret is filtered through billions of neural predictions. What you think is the world is more like a living projection stitched together inside your nervous system. Your mind isn't a window onto reality, it's a lens that bends it. This would just be an interesting fact if it didn't have such deep consequences. Because the more convinced you are that reality is fixed, the less power you feel you have over it. You start reacting instead of observing. You fight shadows believing they're walls. You call things facts when they're really habits of perception. There's a subtle danger here. When you believe the world is solid and separate, you also believe your suffering comes from outside. You say, "He made me angry. That situation ruined my day. This always happens to me." Each sentence builds another layer of separation between you and what you're observing, as if life were something done to you, not through you. But even physics, the language of solidity, disagrees. On the smallest scales, matter itself isn't a fixed thing, but a cloud of probabilities, a shimmering field that behaves differently the moment it's observed. The famous double-slit experiment doesn't just show particles acting like waves. It shows that observation changes what's real. It's unsettling but also liberating. The act of looking carries weight. Maybe that's why the more you worry about a problem, the more it seems to multiply. Your attention doesn't just witness, it amplifies. The mind keeps confirming the pattern it expects to find. It's as if your observation is an echo chamber, reflecting your own signal back to you, slightly louder each time. Here's a small test. Think about something that bothers you. Not the story around it, but the physical sensation of it, the tightness in the chest, the heat behind the eyes. Then, instead of calling it anger or fear, just observe it like you would a cloud passing. Notice how quickly the boundary between me and it begins to blur. For a moment, there's only awareness watching movement. That's what it's like when the illusion of solidity softens. This isn't mystical, it's practical. The observer and the observed aren't two separate realities. They're one process happening in real time. You influence your external world in the same way a musician shapes a note, by the way you listen to it. So when you catch yourself saying, "This is just how things are," pause. That phrase is the sound of a door closing between you and your own creative power. Reality isn't a monument carved in stone. It's more like a field of possibilities waiting for the shape of your attention. The mind prefers solidity because it feels safe. Uncertainty feels like chaos, yet it's the same space where transformation hides. When you stop clinging to the idea of a solid world, you begin to sense a different kind of order, one that responds to how you observe, not just what you do. And that leads to the deeper question. If what seems solid is just an echo of observation, what exactly is your attention doing to the world around you? There's a strange, almost invisible force guiding your entire experience of life. Attention. Not thought, not emotion, not even belief has as much immediate creative power as the simple act of focusing. Everything you focus on expands. Everything you ignore fades into the background. It sounds poetic, but it's brutally literal. Consider the last time you bought a new car or a pair of shoes. Suddenly that same model or color seems to appear everywhere, on highways, in parking lots, on strangers' feet. The world didn't suddenly change. Your perception did. Your brain flagged that object as meaningful, and your attention began pulling matching data from the background noise of existence. You were tuning your personal frequency. Attention is not passive. It's a selection mechanism, deciding which sliver of infinity becomes your world. Out of millions of possible stimuli at any second, you experience maybe 40 bits consciously. Everything else, the hum of the refrigerator, the warmth on your skin, the subtle tension in your shoulders, disappears from awareness until you look at it. And that disappearance is not accidental. It's how reality becomes manageable. But it also means that the version of the world you live in is literally sculpted by where you place your gaze. Neuroscientists call this attentional bias. Psychologists call it confirmation bias. Spiritual teachers call it manifestation. Different words, same architecture. What you habitually focus on instructs your nervous system to build evidence for it. If you believe life is hostile, your perception becomes a filter that highlights threats. If you expect generosity, you start noticing gestures that were invisible before. The universe seems to echo back the dominant signal of your mind. Here's the paradox. You think you're observing reality, but most of the time you're observing your own attention bouncing off it. The things that seem to keep happening to you are often loops of unexamined focus. You say, I keep meeting unreliable people, or I always run into delays. But what if those patterns are attention habits, not cosmic punishments? Try this subtle experiment. Today, choose one ordinary object, say the color blue. Decide that every time you notice blue, you'll take one slow, conscious breath. Then just go about your day. By evening, you'll be astonished by how alive that color seems, in signs, clothes, reflections, even shadows. The color was always there. Your attention simply tuned into it. You just proved that focus determines visibility. Now imagine that instead of the color blue, you're constantly tuned to scarcity, to problems, to what's missing. That's the invisible radio band most people live on. You keep scanning for confirmation that life is difficult, and you keep finding it because the dial hasn't moved. Reality becomes an echo chamber for the content of your attention. The power of attention doesn't stop at perception. It reaches into physiology. When you focus on something threatening, your body releases cortisol. Your muscles tighten, your vision narrows. When you shift attention to something steady or beautiful, your heartbeat changes rhythm, your breath lengthens, your neural patterns reorganize. The body listens to where the mind looks. That's how your biology literally collaborates with your focus to build what feels like reality. This is why two people can face the same situation, a job loss, a breakup, an illness, and one falls apart while the other grows stronger. It's not luck or moral superiority, it's attention management. One person unconsciously feeds the loop of fear, the other feeds the loop of learning. The external facts remain identical, but the inner echo transforms everything. Here's a gentle check-in. What's been occupying your attention today? Not what you think you believe, but where your gaze actually rests. What have you rehearsed in your mind 10 times? What have you refused to notice because it didn't fit the story? Attention, after all, is a currency. Spend it unconsciously and you'll go bankrupt in energy. Spend it deliberately and you start buying moments of clarity. The challenge isn't to force positive thinking. That's still a form of resistance. The real shift happens when you simply notice where your attention lives most of the time. Awareness itself begins to reprogram the habit. It's like turning on a light in a room you thought was empty and finding 1,000 tools you didn't know you owned. So when life starts repeating the same lesson, ask yourself, what am I feeding with my focus? Because whatever you feed grows roots. Attention is the fertilizer of reality. And until you reclaim it, reality keeps echoing the same tune, waiting for you to change the station. And that leads to the deeper trap. When attention is left on autopilot, you stop being the conscious observer and become a passive witness to your own loops. That's where the next turning point begins. There's a quiet tragedy that hides behind most people's daily lives. It's not failure or loss or even fear. It's the slow surrender of authorship, the moment when you stop realizing that you're participating in the reality you experience and instead begin to believe you're merely enduring it. That's the fatal mistake of the passive observer, forgetting that observation itself is an act of creation. You can hear it in the language we use. He ruined my mood. Life just keeps testing me. This is happening to me again. Every phrase assumes the same geometry, you at the center, and life as a series of external blows. But what if those blows aren't external at all? What if they're reverberations of your own observation, returning in the exact tone you send out? Passive observation happens when attention loses intention. You still look, but you don't see. You drift through days reacting, analyzing, judging, labeling, all automatic, all unconscious. The mind becomes a mirror that no longer reflects light, but traps it, replaying old patterns under the illusion of objectivity. Think about walking into a room filled with tension. You immediately feel it. No one said a word, but your body registers the field. You tense up, and by doing so, you strengthen that same tension in the space. In seconds, you've joined the vibration you thought you were simply noticing. That's the loop of the passive observer, mistaking resonance for reality. When you see life as happening to you, your awareness collapses inward. You shrink from participant to spectator. The nervous system follows suit. Your breath shallows, your senses narrow, your mind scans for threats. It's a biological echo of a psychological stance. And from that stance, everything seems to confirm your helplessness. Coincidences line up to prove that nothing ever works out. People mirror back your guardedness. Opportunities slide past because your perception is tuned to defense, not possibility. It's not that the universe punishes you for inattention. It simply responds with coherence. Whatever signal you broadcast through observation, it amplifies. The moment you choose passivity, you begin resonating with patterns that validate it. The echo deepens. The more you believe you're powerless, the more evidence arrives to confirm it. Here's a quiet experiment you can try the next time conflict arises. When someone speaks to you in anger or frustration, resist the instinct to mirror it back or retreat. Instead, observe yourself observing. Feel what your attention is doing, where it lands, what it feeds. Without defending or collapsing, simply watch your own watching. Something shifts immediately. The emotional energy loses traction. You've stepped out of the loop of reactivity and back into authorship. The difference is microscopic, but decisive. Observation with awareness creates space. Observation without awareness collapses it. In physics, that collapse is literal. The observer effect determines which potential becomes real. In human experience, it's emotional. Awareness decides whether a moment becomes another wound or a point of clarity. It's tempting to blame circumstances for the quality of our days, but blame is just attention disguised as defense. The more you aim your awareness outward, the less feedback you get from within. You stop noticing the micro signals, the flicker of impatience, the tightening jaw, the subtle craving for validation. Each one is a doorway into authorship, but you walk past them while staring at the screen of external reality. And that's how the loop closes. The external world keeps echoing your internal stance, and because you don't see the connection, you double down on resistance. You react louder, you observe less, and the echo strengthens. The world seems crueler not because it is, but because the observer has gone silent inside. There's a peculiar moment in every awakening, the instant you realize you've been both the actor and the projector all along. But before that realization stabilizes, the mind rebels. It says, so everything is my fault? No. Responsibility isn't blame. It's the return of creative influence. The passive observer believes observation is neutral. The conscious observer knows it's generative. When you begin to sense this, life starts whispering instead of shouting. Patterns loosen. Reality feels less like a sequence of accidents and more like a living feedback system. And that's the turning point where science and spirituality start to overlap, where the physics of observation meets the psychology of expectation. Because beneath every loop of experience, pleasant or painful, lies a mechanism, a mirror, a signal returning home. And to understand how that mechanism works, you need to look closer at the science behind the echo itself. When people hear the phrase reality responds to observation, they often file it under mysticism, something poetic but not quite real. Yet both physics and psychology quietly agree. The act of observing changes what is observed. The echo isn't fantasy. It's a structural property of consciousness interacting with information. In quantum physics, this truth hides in plain sight. Before being measured, a particle doesn't have a definite position. It exists as a probability wave, a cloud of possibilities. The instant an observation occurs, that wave collapses into one tangible outcome. The observer doesn't just see reality. In a sense, they help select it. This isn't spiritual metaphor. It's experiment. In the double-slit test, light behaves like a wave when unobserved, but turns into discrete particles when measured. Observation itself changes behavior. The universe, it seems, waits for attention before making up its mind. Of course, the human mind isn't peering into subatomic chambers every day, but the same principle scales up through psychology and neuroscience. Perception is not a neutral recording device. It's a construction process. Your brain is a prediction engine. It doesn't capture the world, it builds one. Billions of bits of sensory data flood in every second, but your conscious awareness handles only a sliver. To make sense of it, your brain fills the gaps with assumptions drawn from memory, expectation, and emotional state. The result, a personalized, internally consistent version of the world that seems external, but is actually curated. Confirmation bias is the everyday echo of the observer effect. You perceive what you expect to find, and then your perception proves your expectation was right. It's a cognitive feedback loop identical in structure to the quantum one. Observation influencing outcome, outcome shaping future observation. This is why two people can interpret the same event as proof of opposite truths. The event is neutral. The observer defines its meaning. There's also the phenomenon known as emotional tagging. When you focus intensely on something charged, a fear, a desire, a memory, your limbic system marks it as important. Then your reticular activating system, the brain's internal filter, scans your environment for matching signals. You begin to find what you've emotionally declared meaningful. It's not magic, it's neurological patterning. Your biology becomes the mechanism through which attention sculpts experience. Imagine reality as an ocean of frequencies, each representing potential outcomes. Your mind functions like a tuning fork. It resonates most with the vibrations that match your internal state. That resonance shapes what you notice, how you interpret it, and how you act. Those actions then feed back into the environment, creating the outer echo of an inner signal. The echo isn't mysterious anymore. It's systemic coherence. A small but telling example, someone convinced that people can't be trusted unconsciously scans for microsigns of betrayal, a pause in conversation, a delay in reply, a tone shift. Their nervous system interprets these as validation, releasing the stress chemicals of vigilance. Their behavior subtly tightens. Others sense that tension and mirror it. Soon, the environment confirms exactly what the person believed. No one lied, but the echo became real. Now switch the variable. A person who expects cooperation radiates safety cues, relaxed shoulders, slower voice, open gaze. Those around them respond with receptivity. The brain registers that response as evidence that the world is friendly. The belief strengthens and the cycle stabilizes. Reality adjusts. not because the person forced it, but because the feedback loop between observation and manifestation found coherence. This dynamic can be measured. Studies using fMRI have shown that when individuals consciously reframe a situation, their prefrontal cortex modulates the amygdala, the region tied to fear. The emotional charge diminishes, altering perception and behavior simultaneously. Change your interpretation, and you literally rewire your neural echo chamber. That's why it's more accurate to say we participate in reality rather than create it from nothing. We don't summon circumstances out of thin air. We interact with fields of probability through attention and expectation. The echo of observation isn't a miracle, it's mechanics. Understanding this doesn't just make you more mindful, it restores a sense of accountability. If reality keeps repeating the same themes, it might not be punishment or destiny. It might be your brain's attempt to maintain coherence, to keep the internal model aligned with the external signal. And coherence always wins until awareness intervenes. So the question becomes, how do you change the signal you're sending into the field? How do you alter the frequency of your own observation so the echo reflects something new? That's where the metaphor of the internal quantum mirror begins to reveal its real significance. Imagine standing before a mirror that doesn't just reflect your face, it reflects your state of consciousness. You frown, and it darkens. You breathe calmly, and the light in the room shifts. You don't change the mirror by touching it, you change it by the way you look at it. That's closer to how reality works than most people dare to believe. The world doesn't show you what it is, it shows you who you are while you're observing. This isn't philosophy dressed as comfort. It's the observable dance between perception and manifestation. Every emotion, every judgment, every internal vibration acts like light striking a reflective surface, bouncing back into form, shaped by its own frequency. You're not looking at reality, you're looking into an intelligent feedback loop that constantly reveals your inner architecture. Think about how a mirror works. It doesn't invent the image. It receives it, reverses it, and returns it to you instantly. Reality behaves in a similar way. It receives your perception, reverses it through time and space, and returns a material reflection. The outer circumstances that appear random are often the reversed image of your internal focus. You interpret a delay as rejection, and soon doors seem to close. You interpret silence as peace, and suddenly, even waiting becomes calm. The difference isn't in the world, it's in the observer who defines the reflection. This idea isn't mystical, it's mechanical. Observation is an act of resonance. Your thoughts, emotions, and sensory attention form a pattern, and the environment mirrors that pattern through synchronicities, coincidences, and emotional tone. Quantum mechanics shows that matter responds to observation. Psychology shows that perception edits experience. The two together form the mirror, a loop of attention returning to its source, disguised as external reality. You can witness this mirror in small, verifiable ways. Recall a morning when you woke up irritated. Maybe you spilled coffee, traffic slowed, someone's tone rubbed you wrong. Each event seemed to cause the mood, yet the sequence might have been reversed. The mood created the pattern of noticing. The quantum mirror was already calibrated to irritation, and the world, ever faithful, obliged. Now picture a different morning when you felt centered for no special reason. The same traffic, the same people, yet nothing hooked your attention. Life seemed smoother, events less personal. The mirror didn't stop reflecting, it simply changed what it was reflecting. You altered your frequency and the image followed. The dangerous misunderstanding is to believe that the mirror creates reality. Mirrors don't create, they reveal. When you understand this, guilt and magical thinking dissolve. You don't need to manifest by force, you only need to tune your internal stance. The reflection obeys automatically, not because you control it, but because it cannot do otherwise. This explains why resistance feels so exhausting. When you fight the reflection, you're essentially arguing with a mirror image. Push harder, and the reflection pushes back. Accept what you see without identifying with it, and the surface softens. In that neutrality, new forms begin to appear. Not because the mirror changed, but because your gaze did. There's a simple but radical practice you can try. The next time something in your environment disturbs you, a person's comment, a failure, an unexpected obstacle, pause before reacting. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this reflecting from me right now?" Don't rush to answer. Let the question hang in stillness. You might sense a subtle shift, a quiet awareness that the disturbance isn't punishment, it's feedback. That awareness alone starts polishing the mirror from the inside. Reality then becomes less of a battlefield and more of an instrument, an exquisitely tuned device for self-awareness. The mirror doesn't lie, but it's merciful. It always waits for you to see clearly before it reflects clearly. The external noise starts making sense once you realize it's not separate from you. It's the echo of your own frequency vibrating through the field. If you truly want to test this mirror, here's something small but revealing. For the next day, notice one repeated pattern in your life, a kind of person, situation, or emotion that seems to keep returning. Write it down. Then, instead of asking how to stop it, ask what part of you it's faithfully mirroring. Observe without judgment. The insight that follows won't be philosophical. It will be biological. You'll feel the alignment as a physical release. And if this resonates with you, take a moment right now, like a signal bouncing in that same mirror, to leave a reflection of your own. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to see what my mirror is showing me." It's a small declaration, but saying it anchors awareness. Because the moment you claim authorship of the reflection, the mirror begins to change. And that's when the cycle of negative self-observation starts to break, when you stop fighting the reflection and begin transforming the one who observes. There's a specific point at which observation turns toxic, when the mirror stops reflecting and starts magnifying. It happens quietly, usually disguised as awareness. You tell yourself you're simply noticing what's wrong, being realistic, staying alert. But attention, once locked on dysfunction, becomes a signal amplifier. The very act of watching your own pain deepens it. The echo gets louder. Every cycle of negative self-observation begins with an innocent intention, to understand what's not working. You look at your anxiety, your failures, your loneliness, hoping that analyzing them will bring clarity. Instead, the analysis itself becomes the generator. You start scanning your mind for patterns of fear, and in doing so, feed those same neural pathways. The more you observe lack, the more the brain prioritizes it. Like an algorithm learning your preferences, your attention starts serving you more of what you stare at. It's not malice, it's efficiency. The nervous system assumes that what you repeatedly notice must be important for survival, so it devotes more processing power to those signals. That's why dwelling on mistakes makes them feel monumental, and why self-criticism seems rational even when it's self-destructive. The brain is obeying your focus. It doesn't care whether the content makes you happy, it only cares that you keep returning to it. From a distance, this looks like a loop of emotional gravity. You think a negative thought, feel its emotional weight, notice the heaviness, interpret that heaviness as proof of the thought's truth and fall deeper into its orbit. That's how observation becomes creation without your consent. You're still the observer, but you've gone passive, allowing the echo to define its own rhythm. Imagine standing in a canyon and shouting your own insecurities into it. "I'm failing. No one listens. I always mess this up." The canyon doesn't argue. It simply returns the sound, multiplied and prolonged. Each echo reinforces the original vibration until it feels external, as if the world itself was saying those words back to you. That's the danger of unconscious observation. The echo starts to sound like reality. Psychologically, this mechanism shows up as rumination, the compulsion to re-watch the same mental footage over and over, hoping for a different ending. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reflection and planning, loops through the past in search of control, while the limbic system keeps flooding your body with stress signals. You end up living inside a feedback loop between cognition and chemistry. Each thought rewires the emotional state that then generates more of the same thoughts. The risk escalates when this cycle extends beyond the mind into behavior. You begin anticipating failure, so you act cautiously, withdraw, or sabotage small opportunities. Those choices produce evidence that supports your original observation. See, I was right. The loop tightens. What began as a single self-critical moment becomes a self-fulfilling structure. There's a biological explanation too. Chronic self-focus activates the brain's default mode network, the system linked to daydreaming, self-referencing, and internal storytelling. Studies show that overactivation of this network correlates with anxiety and depression. It's like staring at the mirror so long that you forget there's a world outside it. When you constantly observe your inner world through the lens of negativity, the neural pattern solidifies. The mirror fuses to your face. But there's a subtle way out, and it begins with noticing how you're observing, not what you're observing. Try this. The next time you catch yourself replaying a failure, shift your awareness from the content of the thought to the process of thinking itself. Feel the physical sensation of being the one who notices. That small pivot breaks the hypnotic continuity of the loop. Observation turns from self-judgment into self-remembering. It helps to realize that negative self-observation isn't a moral flaw. It's an energy trap. The system simply doesn't know how to stop feeding itself. The same focus that spirals you downward can, when redirected, spiral you out. Awareness, when used consciously, reverses its polarity. You stop being the echo and start listening to it. And that listening begins to dissolve the pattern. In spiritual language, this is called detachment. In psychology, it's called meta-awareness. Both describe the same event, the observer becoming aware of its own reflection rather than trapped inside it. When that happens, the energy that was sustaining the loop begins to release. What once felt like your life falling apart reveals itself as feedback, the mirror finally showing what's ready to be seen. And yet, there's an even deeper twist. Most people think breaking the loop means creating a new reality. But what if creation isn't the right word at all? What if the observer isn't generating new worlds, but tuning into ones that already exist? That's where the illusion of control gives way to the physics of coherence, and where the next revelation begins. Here's the twist most people resist. You're not creating reality. You're tuning into it. That single shift changes everything, from the pressure you put on yourself to the way you understand coincidence, effort, and control. The universe isn't a canvas waiting for you to paint. It's a symphony already playing. And your consciousness is simply one of its instruments aligning with a specific melody. Think about a radio. It doesn't generate the music. It receives frequencies already moving through the air. When you turn the dial, you don't manifest the song. You align with it. The sound appears not because you forced it into existence, but because you matched its vibration. Reality works in the same way. Infinite possibilities exist in the quantum field. Every scenario, every outcome, every version of you. Observation doesn't create them from nothing. It collapses one probability into experience. For years, people have interpreted this as evidence that your thoughts create your world. But the truth is subtler. Your thoughts don't fabricate matter. They determine which pattern of matter you attune to. Consciousness is a receiver, not a factory. It filters infinity down into one lived moment, a frequency you can feel in your nervous system. The more coherent your attention, the cleaner the signal. You can sense this when you're aligned with something. Life stops feeling random. Synchronicities appear, decisions flow naturally, and time itself seems to cooperate. That's not because you're bending the universe to your will, it's because your inner frequency has locked onto a band of reality that matches your current state. The static fades, the song plays clearly. When you're out of alignment, it's like being between stations, fragments of meaning, but mostly noise. Science echoes this through the language of resonance. Every atom vibrates, every neural circuit oscillates. The brain's rhythms synchronize to external patterns, a process called entrainment. When two frequencies are close enough, one naturally adjusts to the other. That's why your heart rate changes with music, why your breathing slows near calm people, and why your entire physiology mirrors the emotional tone you keep returning to. Observation, then, is an act of resonance. You don't make the world vibrate. You join the vibration that already exists. This redefines responsibility. Instead of struggling to force reality into shape, your task becomes refining your capacity to tune, to choose which broadcast you receive. And here's where the paradox unfolds. The more you try to control what you observe, the more resistance you create because control is a form of noise. But the more you relax into awareness, the clearer the frequency becomes. Alignment doesn't happen through effort, it happens through coherence. Imagine standing in front of that internal quantum mirror again. When you frown at your reflection, it's not the glass producing the frown, it's simply reflecting your current shape. Trying to manifest a smile while still frowning inside creates tension, distortion, static. But when you truly shift your expression, not by pretending, but by changing your inner tone, the mirror adjusts effortlessly. The reflection doesn't need convincing. It only needs coherence. This is why some forms of positive thinking fail. They try to overlay a higher frequency on top of a dissonant one. You repeat affirmations like, "I am abundant," while internally vibrating with fear of scarcity. The signal conflicts, the mirror blurs, and nothing changes. It's not because the universe is ignoring you. It's because you're trying to transmit two stations at once. Reality only reflects the dominant frequency, not the spoken wish. Understanding that you're a tuner instead of a creator lifts a hidden burden. You no longer need to make the impossible happen. You only need to become compatible with it. The work moves inward, from control to calibration. Instead of asking, "How do I make this appear?" you begin to ask, "How do I align with what already exists?" It's a quieter form of mastery, one that replaces willpower with awareness. Once you sense this, daily life becomes an ongoing experiment in resonance. Every reaction becomes data. When something feels like friction, you're probably out of tune. When events unfold with effortless timing, you're synchronized. The feedback is instantaneous. And yet, tuning into a higher frequency of reality requires more than momentary intention. It requires retraining the way you observe. Observation is the dial itself, and every shift in focus is a subtle turn, which means the next layer of the journey isn't about controlling the reflection or the song on the radio. It's about learning how to reprogram the very mechanism that decides what you notice, what you amplify, and what you bring into form. The instrument of observation itself. If attention is the dial and reality is the station, then observation is the hand turning the knob. The real power doesn't lie in what you look at, but in how you look. Most people try to change their outer world, rearranging relationships, chasing new goals, switching environments, without realizing that their perception remains coded with the same internal software. Until that code changes, the patterns repeat. Reprogramming your observation isn't about forcing yourself to see things differently. It's about retraining the mechanism that decides what becomes visible in the first place. The human brain is a predictive machine, always filling in gaps, always confirming expectations. It's not showing you reality, it's showing you a simulation filtered through past experiences, beliefs, and emotional tone. To see clearly, you have to teach that machine how to pause before it predicts. Neuroscience calls this top-down processing, perception shaped by expectation. When you anticipate rejection, you notice coldness in neutral faces. When you expect beauty, you find it in the mundane. The stimulus hasn't changed, your internal algorithm has. Reprogramming observation means interrupting that predictive loop long enough to insert a new variable, awareness itself. One of the simplest ways to begin is by practicing deliberate neutrality. The next time you experience a strong reaction, irritation, fear, disappointment, resist naming it for a few seconds. Instead of labeling the feeling, observe it as a texture, a pattern of energy in the body. There's tightness, there's heat, there's contraction. This small linguistic shift stops the brain from reinforcing its usual narrative. In that gap, something profound happens. The observer separates from the reaction, and a new pathway opens. You can think of this as debugging consciousness. Every belief you've ever formed has written small pieces of code into your perceptual field. People don't listen. I'm not good enough. good things don't last. Each line of code influences what data your attention allows through. Awareness, when directed inwardly, acts like a system reset, a momentary return to factory settings, where perception becomes fresh again. There's also a biological reason this works. When you shift from judgment to observation, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for regulation and insight, activates while the amygdala, responsible for alarm, quiets down. Blood flow changes, stress hormones drop, the body physically mirrors the mental reprogramming. You're no longer broadcasting from fear but from curiosity, and that curiosity changes the signal you send into the quantum field. Over time, this practice reconditions the mind's pattern recognition system, the reticular activating system, which filters millions of stimuli to decide what's important. When you start rewarding presence instead of worry, the filter recalibrates. You begin noticing synchronicities, opportunities, subtle invitations from life that were always there but hidden by noise. You haven't changed the world. You've updated the observer's software. This is also where spirituality and neuroplasticity quietly converge. The brain rewires itself through repetition and emotion. Each time you consciously witness without judgment, you're strengthening a new neural network, one that privileges awareness over reaction. Over days, then weeks, the pattern of automatic reactivity weakens. The echo that used to define your reality starts fading because the observer who sustained it is dissolving. But reprogramming isn't a one-time event, it's a continual dialogue. Every moment of friction is an opportunity to refine your tuning. The more you practice watching without naming, the more fluid perception becomes. Life stops appearing as a sequence of problems to solve and starts revealing itself as information to interpret. You begin to sense the intelligence behind events, how challenges, coincidences, and pauses are all feedback from the same mirror asking, what frequency are you choosing now? At a practical level, you can treat observation as a kind of meditation in motion. Walking down the street, feel your eyes scanning. Notice how quickly the mind assigns meaning. Beautiful, ugly, safe, dangerous. Gently suspend those judgments. Let things be what they are, unfiltered. In that neutrality, the world feels strangely alive again, as if colors deepen and time slows. That's not imagination, it's perception freed from bias. Eventually, this new mode of seeing seeps into everything. Conversations become clearer because you're not listening through defense. Problems dissolve faster because you're observing without emotional fog. Even failure transforms because the observer recognizes it as data, not verdict. You're no longer the character reacting to life. You're the awareness shaping which frame of reality you step into next. And when observation itself becomes flexible, something extraordinary happens. Coherence arises, the natural alignment between what you notice, what you feel, and what you do. That alignment isn't achieved through discipline or affirmation, but through the subtle art of watching consciously. It's the hidden symmetry that stops reality from echoing confusion and starts reflecting clarity. And it's exactly there, in that silent harmony, that the next revelation begins to unfold. There's a kind of alignment most people never talk about, not because it's mystical or secret, but because it's too simple and too confronting. It requires coherence between three things that rarely agree: what you observe, what you feel, and what you do. The mind watches one world, the heart reacts to another, and the body acts out a third. That fragmentation becomes the source of every echo, confusion reflected as chaos, hesitation reflected as delay. This forbidden alignment is not hidden by some cosmic veil. It's hidden by habit. We've been trained to separate perception from participation, to think one thing, feel another, and act out a third version that seems socially acceptable. Observation becomes detached, feeling becomes suppressed, and action becomes mechanical. The result is incoherence, a signal split into static. The universe, faithful as always, mirrors that fragmentation right back. Coherence, by contrast, is when your entire system, mind, emotion, physiology, resonates in the same frequency. You think clarity, you feel truth, you act integrity. That state doesn't make you invincible. It makes you visible. Life stops misinterpreting your signal. People respond differently. Events align more fluidly. And reality echoes consistency instead of contradiction. To understand this alignment, imagine an orchestra. Each section, strings, brass, percussion, represents a layer of your being. When one instrument drifts off key, the music still plays, but dissonance creeps in. You can't always identify the exact source of the discord, but you feel it. That's what incoherence feels like. The body tense while the mind insists it's fine, or the mind chasing calm while the heart pounds a different rhythm. The melody of existence becomes slightly out of tune. Neuroscience provides a mirror for this idea. Studies on heart-brain coherence show that when emotional and cognitive rhythms synchronize, the entire nervous system enters a state of efficiency. The heart emits a stable electromagnetic field. The brain's wave patterns smooth out. People report clearer thinking, faster recovery from stress, and a sense of connected awareness. The body literally becomes more intelligent when its parts stop arguing. That's why this alignment feels forbidden. It exposes every subtle dishonesty. You can't pretend calm if your body vibrates with anxiety. The dissonance becomes unbearable. You can't fake gratitude while secretly rehearsing resentment. The heart's field won't resonate with the words. The mirror of reality won't lie to you anymore. It starts returning evidence of your internal conflict until you either face it or exhaust yourself maintaining the illusion. To practice alignment, you don't need belief. You need sincerity. Before any action or decision, pause long enough to sense the internal triad. What am I observing right now? What am I feeling? What am I preparing to do? If those three aren't describing the same reality, coherence is impossible. The dissonance becomes data. The goal isn't perfection, but awareness. When you catch the mismatch, don't fix it immediately. Just watch the friction. The act of noticing begins to recalibrate the system. In that pause, a strange intelligence appears, not analytical but integrative. The mind starts listening to the body starts informing the heart, and the heart begins guiding perception. This is not hierarchy, it's conversation. Reality itself seems to respond to that internal honesty, as though it had been waiting for all your instruments to play the same note. You can witness this shift in the smallest of acts. When you speak truthfully, not as performance but as resonance, people's nervous systems relax. Their breathing synchronizes with yours. The environment literally changes texture. That's the signature of coherence, the external mirror adjusting to the inner frequency without effort. It's worth noticing that incoherence thrives on speed. The faster you move, the easier it is for perception, emotion, and action to desynchronize. The nervous system defaults to autopilot. You lose the feedback loop. Alignment demands slowness, not as laziness but as precision. In the still moment before reaction, everything has a chance to catch up. Thought to meet feeling, feeling to inform motion. That instant of unity is where awareness starts shaping matter instead of merely describing it. Over time, coherence stops being a practice and becomes a posture. You walk into situations and sense their tone before anyone speaks. You notice when your voice or heartbeat drifts off rhythm and adjust without judgment. Life begins to feel less like a series of corrections and more like an ongoing attunement. But coherence is not an endpoint, it's a threshold. When the inner orchestra finally plays in harmony, something remarkable happens. Reality stops echoing confusion and begins reflecting intelligence. It's as if the field around you reorganizes to match your newfound symmetry. And at that moment, you realize the true purpose of conscious observation, not to control reality, but to enter into communion with it. That communion is where the next shift takes place, when the observer no longer feels separate from what is being observed, and the act of seeing itself becomes a form of creation through harmony. It's here, at the edge of that coherence, that the turning point of conscious observation begins to emerge. There comes a moment in every inner journey when you realize that the observer and the observed were never two separate things. Up until then, life feels like a dialogue between you and the world. You act, the world responds. You think, it echoes. But at the turning point of conscious observation, that duality dissolves. The act of seeing becomes inseparable from what is seen. Reality stops being a stage you stand upon and becomes a living field that moves with your awareness. It usually begins subtly. You start noticing how the tone of your inner state shifts the tone of the outer world. People respond to your calmness even when you say nothing. Circumstances untangle themselves when you stop fighting them. There's no magic in it. It's coherence finding expression. The observer who once tried to manage life now learns to meet it. Observation becomes participation. For most of your life, you've been trained to think of awareness as passive, a spotlight that illuminates things out there. But awareness is not a light on the stage. It's the stage itself. Every time you observe consciously, you stabilize the field around you. Every time you observe unconsciously, through fear, resentment, or judgment, the field destabilizes. It mirrors the turbulence of its source. Conscious observation, then, is not a technique but a state of resonance in which perception and reality vibrate in phase. To experience this, try remembering a moment when time seemed to slow down, the instant before an accident, or during deep beauty, or while holding someone's gaze with full presence. In that suspended awareness, there was no separation between you and the moment. Action and observation happened simultaneously. That is the architecture of conscious observation. When you live from there, the universe stops echoing old frequencies and starts harmonizing with your current note. Science quietly hints at this integration. Studies in neurophenomenology, the bridge between brain and experience, show that self-referential activity in the brain decreases during deep mindfulness states. The sense of, "I am observing this," dissolves, replaced by a direct awareness of being both subject and object. Energy once spent on self-monitoring gets freed into perception itself. In that unity, cognition becomes creative. The observer is no longer reacting to input, but shaping it in real time. The practical effect of this shift is startlingly gentle. You stop chasing outcomes. You begin to notice the subtle intelligence already embedded in every circumstance. Obstacles turn into mirrors. Coincidences turn into choreography. The line between intuition and logic blurs because both are operating within the same field of coherence. Life doesn't feel like it's happening to you or for you. It feels like it's happening as you. This isn't surrender in the traditional sense. It's precision. The conscious observer learns to act without resistance, to move as an extension of the field rather than a manager of it. You still make decisions, but they're quieter, cleaner, almost effortless. Thought becomes a tool again instead of a tyrant. The body, once tense from anticipation, begins to move in rhythm with events. You might notice how this turning point reveals itself in your most ordinary routines. Making coffee, walking, speaking, all become opportunities to sense the continuity between attention and form. You're not observing the steam from the cup. The steam is the visible trace of your observation. When awareness is steady, the world appears sharper, richer, more real. When attention fragments, the image distorts. Conscious observation keeps adjusting the focus. There's also a deep emotional consequence: compassion. The moment you recognize that what you observe is part of you, judgment begins to lose its function. Criticism feels like shouting into your own reflection. Even conflict takes on a new flavor. Less as opposition, more as communication within a single organism. You stop needing to fix people or prove anything. You start listening for coherence in everything. The turning point isn't a single event. It's a steady unfolding. Some days you slip back into reactivity, feeling separate again, but each return to awareness strengthens the bridge. Over time, you stop falling completely. You notice the gap faster, recover quicker, and rejoin the field with less friction. Observation matures into intimacy, and at that stage, reality itself seems to evolve with you. The outer world begins mirroring higher levels of order, not because you've conquered chaos, but because you've stopped generating it. You begin to sense that consciousness and creation are two faces of the same phenomenon. Awareness expressing itself through form. The observer becomes the living instrument of balance. When you reach this point, you no longer look for signs that your practice works. The feedback is immediate. Peace becomes the metric, clarity the proof. Conscious observation isn't about influencing reality anymore. It's about synchronizing with it so completely that influence becomes irrelevant. And it's from this new symmetry between self and world that the next natural question arises, not how to create your life, but how to live as the echo that knows itself as sound. Everything you experience outside is just consciousness folding back on itself, the echo of the observer resonating through form. Life was never happening to you. It has always been happening as you. The mirror doesn't lie or punish. It simply reflects your frequency until you learn to see clearly. When your observation becomes conscious, reality stops repeating your confusion and starts amplifying your coherence. You don't control the universe, you align with it. If you've made it this far, you already sense it. Awareness itself is the creative act. So write in the comments, "I am the echo and the observer." That will tell me you reached the end consciously. And if this message resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on your screen. Each one expands this same field of awareness in a new direction.